one of the things I think that we will learn being together for 2 days is that there is absolutely no perfect path across generations. And as a matter of fact, every single family has a wonderful story, and in order to be successful, they have to improvise. They have to create their own path. So we've got 4 people here, and usually on a panel, I say, well, gee, there's a real theme and a connection. And in this panel, I have to say that we have 4 of the most diverse families that you can imagine, and none of them is atypical, and none of them is typical. This is just the different paths that a family can take. So the way we're going to do it is we're not going to do 4 presentations. We're going to do 3 rounds. First, each of the panelists is going to introduce themselves and say a little bit about who and what they are in terms of family enterprise. And then we're going to go around with 3 questions, and each of them is going to talk about it. And then we're going to shift, and we're going to have you have table conversations with your families and other people that are at the table about these same issues. And then we'll come back together and do, at the end of the day, do a values exercise. So, Frank, okay.
Does that work
So
okay?
Frank, this is Frank Foster, and he's going to introduce himself.
So my name's Frank Foster. I recently retired as the chairman of the Hixon family companies. The Hixons have been in business since the 1850s together, and we're now in our 7th generation of working together as a family business. The business started in La Crosse, Wisconsin, in the lumber business, a venture capital investment in the 2nd turning to the 3rd generation, turned into the largest electronics company in the United States. And we took that company public and subsequently sold it. And today our businesses are diversified into mainly real estate and then venture capital and oil and gas.
Lisette.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Lisette Gaviña Lopez, and I am the chairman of the board and CEO of my family's company, Gaviña Coffee Company. My family has been in the coffee business for over 150 years. We started as coffee growers and roasters in Cuba with my great-grandfather. So we were in coffee almost 100 years in Cuba before the Communist Revolution. That's when my family fled Cuba through Spain and eventually settled in Los Angeles. And in 1967, my grandfather started us over in coffee in a very, very small way, 1,100 square foot facility. And this business has been my family's focus for the last 60 years. We are a multi-generational family business operating the business together. I work with my sister, 7 of my cousins, my dad, my aunt, and my 2 uncles. My parents' generation are the advisors to us. We're the makers of Don Francisco's coffee, Café La Llave, Jose's gourmet coffee, and also Gaviña gourmet coffee. What else can I say? I'm missing something. But anyway, thank you for having me.
Great. So we've got family office investments, family operating business. James, you've got another story.
Thank you, Dennis. Good afternoon, James Clement. So I actually have a flyer in your book because it gets kind of complicating here about all the family stuff. But my father's family is King Ranch, started in South Texas, and it's a national agriculture corporation with a few other entities too. My mother's family is Beggs Cattle Company, started in 1876. It's more of a classic cattle and horse ranch in West Texas. And then I manage another personal place with a more smaller bunch of family. And then my dad and I founded a business too that's agriculture and family consulting for operations. So as much as we like to think we're ranchers in the business of land, more often we find ourselves in the business of family. And so it keeps getting overlaid over and over. I was also in the Marine Corps for a while. That's really my only, and then I'm in the carbon business now. So those are the only 2 things I've ever done outside of family.
Michael.
So I told you some of the history, and I'll pick it up from that building I showed. So basically, we remained a one-branch bank all the way until our dad's generation to the 3rd generation. And then my dad, he bought out relatives. And actually, the family had a grocery store at that time, and my uncle bought out relatives for the grocery store, and my dad and my uncle both went on their ways and did some great things. So in my uncle's case, now I have something more like 20 stores, mostly around St. Louis, Missouri. And then we grew rapidly when my dad took over, expanded out here to California, among other places. So now, a more sizable company. So although I am fourth generation, I'm effectively second from how it functions with my sister Ellen, who's, we're co-controlling shareholders. In addition, in the 1970s, our parents branched out from banking and then got involved in Herman, Missouri, this town outside of St. Louis, where there's this German history, and that's where they're still in good health, actively involved in this town of Herman. And then in the 1990s, they found this property that hopefully most of you will go to tomorrow, and that's where they founded Star Lane. And so now Ellen and I are co-owners of Star Lane, and we're not there making the wine. We have a great person making the wine, but those are the business we're involved in.
Wow, so a lot of diversity and a lot of development. So let's now talk about the current generation, and let me ask each of you to say a little bit about how the family legacy is alive and in operation for your current generation, how that's being used to help them grow and thrive and contribute not just to the family enterprise, but to other areas. So how are you engaging the next generation?
Well, for our family, it isn't just like a intellectual exercise. We faced the very interesting situation of almost having it all wiped out. And the electronics company I talked about, AMP, grew and was acquired by a company called Tyco. And those of you who may remember Tyco, Tyco bought AMP for $11 billion. This was a big deal for 1998. However, in 2002, Tyco got caught for accounting fraud and almost became the next Enron. So I was, at that point, working in international private equity, had just graduated from Harvard Business School, and came back and had to lead the family exercise to stay together. So I'll talk about that a little bit more during the challenges, but when you have seen your family almost lose it, as Buffett says, you see a lot when the tide goes out. And what we saw was a family that was overly dependent on inherited wealth. We didn't know exactly how to work together, and we'd kind of lost a connection with what our family businesses did. So right now, when I became chairman, I tripled down on the development and training of our next generation. So we have done basically everything we can to make sure a situation like that never happens again, where the family gets caught unprepared. So one of the things that in our family, and we have one of the sixth generation family members here today, is that we have done not just, we pay for summer business schools, we have advisory directorships. I took any young family member who'd graduated from college and could intern for me directly, really an apprenticeship in the venture capital division. We set up an annual meeting just for the 40 and unders in the family, which they run together with the young non-family management, so these groups grow up together. So right now, we'd like to say, the family is 163 members. So my annual meetings are getting big. But, I'd say we are closer than ever as a family, but that's because of what we've done.
So how many members of the next generation would you say are active and engaged with the family when you have these gatherings?
Well, the evidence of it, we have about 30 that regularly attend the young non-family meeting. We have had 19 advisory directors. We've had 15 go through my training program. Eliza's the 15th. We have, I think now had the first young family member rise to being on the board of the real estate company. And when I retired, I still run the venture capital, and I ended up replacing the old board with 3 next generation family members that I trained, so I now work for them. So we are really very focused, Dennis, at this point, as the business expands. And these are long-term, capital-intensive businesses. So you need to have a really engaged, patient, and understanding next generation.
It's just interesting to think about with a family like yours. Leadership isn't a single word. It's so many different things, and all the different ways that family members can be involved and ascend into leadership roles in the family is really fitting the fact that there are many people that can take up those roles.
Well, it gets to a point where you have to run the family based on culture. It's just too big to run it by dictate, as much as I tried. It's a very important thing. And, what we found is we decided that we would invest heavily in our generation just as they were developing their adult identity. So we really focused on 22 to 30. When I saw it, like, remedial training for your 45-year-olds is a little difficult. But we tried to really grab them, and what's happened is we have this amazing rising force of about 30 young family members who have grown up working together, understand the business, and they've brought kind of the older, grumpier folks kind of back into the fold. And for the younger family, they see their cooler, older cousins who actually care and are part of things. And even though they don't work in the business, they're great shareholders. And that's kind of what we aspire to.
Great. Well, Lisette, you've got a very connected family, a very focused thing. How is your next generation involved?
So keeping the legacy alive with our family business, I think we're still in coffee. After 4 generations, we've dedicated, our lives to growing coffee, roasting coffee for many, many years. And growing up in my family business, me and my cousins and my sister, we grew up knowing where we came from, that we were Cuban, that we were coffee people, and that this is what we were going to do in the world. And it's very rare that everyone in a generation would actually join the business at some point. My generation being the 4th generation in coffee, but really partially it's kind of like what Mike was talking about. The founding generation in Los Angeles was my grandparents with their kids, and then it's now the cousins that are together. But it is rare for so many family members to come into the business at this stage. And we're all different ages. I'm one of the older ones. My sister's the oldest. She just turned 47. And my youngest cousin is 30. So you almost have 2 different generations in my generation, different ideas, different thoughts. And, as the family members were coming into the business, actually, I left the family business for some time and came back. I went to business school. I got some experience outside the family business in the corporate world, and then came back and discovered one of my cousins was kind of lost in this like internship program that was kind of made up, I guess. And so I helped formalize that program, and then the rest of my younger cousins went through it, and it really helped them, I think, learn the business and figure out where they wanted to be, what was a good fit for them. And we're still in a transition. My generation took over operational management of the company. It's going to be 2 years ago in January with help from our family business consultant sitting right there, Ali from Orange Kiwi. And you really need help to have some of these challenging conversations. Transitions are not easy. We've been treating it like a baton pass, and I would say we're still in a transition, but we're finding our way. Having conversations that the generation before us never had, conflict that they could never have, and we're working through it.
How do the next generation members that aren't kind of into the coffee business, how do they fit in? How are they involved?
The younger generation?
Yeah.
Well, everybody, coffee is fun, So, growing up, you go to these beautiful exotic places with your parents, like, Costa Rica, or, you're able to go to Colombia or East Africa, and you see how other people live and how coffee has grown. So I think it's hard to not want to be a part of it. My younger cousins are, 2 are in sales. My sister is in accounting or in administration. I'm co-leading the company with two of my cousins. One oversees finance and accounting, the other one operations, HR and IT, and I mostly oversee sales and marketing for the company. So we've all kind of found our area, and it's evolving, you know. The younger generation, they have aspirations, the younger cousins have aspirations for management, so how do we, that's my responsibility, right? Like, how do I develop them and help them be ready and prepare?
Great.
Thank you.
Well, James, you have an interesting situation because your family is not one but two discrete family businesses, and they're both long-standing, and they both have kind of their own traditions, and you're part of two lines. But how are the young family members in both of the family businesses and the family that you're part of, kind of engaged and thriving?
Sure. A trick on me.
Oh, there we go.
So I'll reference mostly to King Ranch because I have the benefit of the other operations learning from that operation because it's the biggest and oldest, biggest in terms of family especially. One thing, and I'll plug, is that Josh's team at BanyanGlobal is helping us right now with some of our issues. But currently it's 5th to 8th generation is King Ranch. So we just had our first 8th, and our last 4th died last year. And so from 0 to 25 years old, there's a variety of experiences we have: an annual family reunion, internships, from 10 years old and up. All the way up to full-time jobs once post-college. At 25 years old, that's something we're still developing right now of what the next step of employment is. But then on some of the things you referenced, Dennis, in your slides, we have a non-voting leadership program where they get to sit in on the meetings and be part of those. We do have 2 in-person meetings, shareholder meetings, and then 2 virtual, so 1 per quarter. But you talked about the younger generation. So currently the board is split 3 ways, basically: outsiders, 5th generation, and 6th generation. And so we're actively involved with my generation in the next few years, taking over the reins of the board and the general direction of the company. The 7th generation is at an age where they're in that 0 to 25 range, so they're being a part of those other things. But then the rest of the 5th and 6th generation, with help, we've started to set up more committees that it's not just a straight family council, because there were certain kind of short-term action committees we needed to do to provide specific information about where do we see the future of our brand, who are some other people we should be working with, do we need to have a new look at some of the mission, vision, the values that we've talked about before. It's not a big jump away. It's just a re-examining of that with the growth of the family and the change of people. And it seems like in the modern era, we've done this 3 times in 60 years. We've done kind of a shake-up of some of the things that we've looked at and what's important to the current generation. But it's over 200 people, and the good thing about King Ranch, and it's kind of a double-edged sword, is we've built an operation that people are very proud of. And so the one thing we haven't figured out is a get-out clause. People don't want to get out. It's strange. We're stuck together. And I say that, politely too. And also our generation, and I've been told this through some of the friends you've introduced me to, Dennis, is probably the last generation where we'll really know each other. The next generation will be too big. And so that's another kind of interesting thing that we're going through of that, because even over 200 of us every year, 180 plus of us get together for a week-long event that's kept us close. But now how do we protect the business where it's weaned off the family completely, but the family is still 100% owners? And so how do we continue to influence the direction of the company? And that's not easy. And again, that's why these kind of conferences and these kind of people that you get to meet and the kind of people you work with are going to be so beneficial to that next 30 years.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask is that even many, many years ago, one of the great examples that were used in family business programs for getting a family together was the King Ranch's annual gathering. And for, I don't know, probably over 100 years maybe, you've had this annual gathering. I wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about what that's like and what that does to create a sense of culture and unity and connection in the family.
Sure. So we call it summer camp. So it's a week-long event, and it's like a summer camp you'd send your children to, but the whole family's involved. And ironically, it was we have the original letter written to my grandparents saying, hey, with the family's growth and moving off, and this is when the family was only 30 people, but moving away from South Texas, we need to have an annual get-together where we get to know each other. The person who wrote that letter sold out 10 years later. But the rest of us have benefited. 1964 was the first one. We only skipped one during COVID. It's a monumental effort. It costs a lot of money. But a lot of people will equate it to the reason why we're still here to this day, because we navigate a lot of rocky waters. And another thing I'll say on that, since you brought it up, is that you felt that 1 year without that, and during COVID, and Zoom meetings and chain emails, you really felt that. And there became a very disruptful period for a moment there when we were not able to get together. Because what you'll say to somebody's face is much different than what you'll say in a vacuum. And that vacuum really, you could feel it in just 3 years, I guess, but 1 year of missing that event. And so it has been really beneficial, and we're lucky because we have a property where we can all get to. And so even though it is expensive, a lot of the costs are fixed because it's part of an operation we're keeping up anyways. But it has been really beneficial, I think, to our carrying this generation forward.
What do you do at the I think it's such a great story. What do you do at the retreat in a gathering? You have fun together. But,
yeah, so
what
it's
kind of education and gatherings do you have?
Sure, and like you said, like the education events, we just had one last weekend. They are not a small logistics thing either. They take a lot of time and effort. And it shuts down the business almost for a couple days because leadership goes there to personally show us things, to develop things for the shareholders. And I think we're finally realizing how big of a deal that is, those education events, both from an operational side and of just pulling everybody together. And 80+% of the family lives in Texas, so we're not that far flung. But so daily activities, and again, that original 1964 schedule is almost adhered to today. You wake up, you go horseback riding. Some people can play tennis. You can go swimming. There's art class for children. And that's the best part about it. The 18 and under crowd is obsessed. When you get older, it becomes a pain, right? You got to travel there. You got to take a week off work if you have a week's vacation to spare. Or you send your wife or husband by themselves to their in-laws retreat, and that's a tough thing to convince. And then there's little get-togethers and learning sessions in the afternoon, a lot of the employees. So again, ranching has become a smaller part of our balance sheet over time, but it's still our culture. And so the cowboys get together, we go rope, we have a rodeo, an employee and family rodeo together. There's a theme night every night, there's a shareholder dinner, there's a board dinner. And so really for 7 days, that is a lot of time, but you are jamming information into people's heads. And we have our annual 6-hour meeting too during that period. And so there's business mixed in as well. But you come home worn out, and but hopefully with some good direction to take the place after that.
Well, Michael, so you have kind of a hybrid. You have an operating business, and you also have an investment family office business. How does your current generation get involved and get help in thriving and growing?
So for my sister and I, because it is, just her and I really, it's a simpler thing. We are starting family meetings. So actually this past August was the first time we ever did that, where we got, really it wasn't about Ellen and I, it was really about the next generation. And so actually we named it, or they named it, their fifth generation. They called it the G5 Summit. Give it kind of this, sounds really good. And it was really geared around education. We didn't tackle any really controversial topics. I mean, part of it was our first go. Ellen and I didn't really want to get anything controversial, especially without any outside help. So I think, down the road, we probably will get outside help in organizing these meetings, because it is, you guys talked about, even with a smaller group, it'd be time-consuming to organize this. But we did want to do that. The other thing I'd say we did for the next generation and generations to come is, is preserving the history. Our dad is an amazing storyteller. He's 86 years old, but he's still as sharp as ever. And so over the last couple of years, we recorded him telling stories about how he grew the bank, the good and the bad. So I think that's all going to be available for the future. I think it's something that we haven't yet taken the step of trying to put it in a book or actually create a movie, but I think that with artificial intelligence, it'd be more like you just ask a question and it'll go to the part of the video where our father talked about that, and hopefully we'll get more of that kind of thing. But I think preserving that history would be a really nice thing for that next generation.
Great. Well, let's have another round now. One of the cliches that everybody has heard is, of course, that a crisis is a danger and an opportunity. And it's easy to say that, but every one of the families in my study had gone through some incredible upheavals and crises, and several, 3 or 4 of them had all of their property and all of their businesses confiscated, and they had to go and flee to another country, and somehow within a generation they were just as prosperous as they were when they had left. And so something is happening in these families, but when they face adversity. And I wanted to ask each of you to kind of talk about a tough challenge and how you overcome it, and what was different in the family, maybe in a positive sense after that. And I know, Frank, you started to tell us your story. It's really?
Yeah. Well, when you get to challenges, we'd had a run of things that went really well for a long time, and that led up to AMP being acquired, which actually was an interesting situation because it had been a hostile takeover originally by a company called Allied Signal, which was run by the meanest man on the planet, and nobody wanted to work for him. So it drove them into the arms of this company, Tyco, run by this incredibly charismatic guy, Dennis Kozlowski. And literally everything this guy touched turned to gold. So we negotiated. It was $11.3 billion sale. Being Tyco, they acquired it. The stock kept going up. The family had diversified. Our oil business was doing well. We'd bought all the parking in downtown San Antonio, and we had our venture start, and actually one of our first investments was Apple. So, things were looking pretty good until they weren't. And in 2002, Kozlowski started behaving strangely, and he got caught cheating on shipping his art from the New Hampshire headquarters into New York overnight. Then he threw a party for his wife in Sardinia with company money that I think was a $2 million party. So some smart short seller in Dallas said, wow, if this guy is making $120 million a year and he still has to cheat on these things, I'll bet that's not the only thing he's cheated on. And they were right. And they dug in and they uncovered systematic accounting fraud in the company. So the stock was at 60. 4 weeks later, it was at 6 and heading for 0. So if you want to see the way your family behaves, you had a moment there where we really almost lost it. So I came back to the United States, and I was asked by the family to lead a program to really decide at that point whether we wanted to stay in business as a family. We've had people calling up the real estate company panicked. Can you sell a building? Can you sell some of those dumb venture investments? The family was really panicking. And so my job was then to try to settle everybody down, and I worked with the then CEO of the real estate company, and we literally went around the country and met with all the family members and put it in front of them, which is, this is a decision point. Given the nature of the businesses, we can't sort of sell a piece of it. We got to make a decision. So we went through with them. I said, this is what it looks like if I sold everything now. And this is what you'd get. And this is our plan, particularly for the real estate company that was growing very fast, being in South Texas. And this is what I think it'll look like if we stay together. Well, I was very happy to say that the family decided to stay all together, and then luckily Tyco did not hit the runway. They put in new management, turned the company around, so the stock came back, and then my cousin and I actually launched a lawsuit against Tyco, and we won back all the money that family members lost selling their public stock under duress. So what was a scary story had a happy ending. But, in the way it's changed us forever is what I was talking about, is we really saw what it looked like when it almost all gets taken away. And I can say to other families, really think about this, because the Hixons didn't do anything wrong. Like, they had, built a great company, and it was just kind of bad luck. So we're always thinking about that right now, is how do we make our family so strong that this will never happen again?
Lisette?
Well, you mentioned, family losing everything. So my family was in the coffee business in Cuba for almost 100 years as growers and roasters and had a very nice life in Cuba. And then Fidel Castro was elected, and he didn't at first declare himself communist, but as soon as he did, the currency changed overnight. It became very unsafe for anybody, any landowners, any business owners to stay. There were rumors spreading that children were going to be separated from their kids, and that's when my grandparents made the decision to leave the country together with their 4 kids. And they said, let's go to Spain, let's see what's going to happen. And they, things didn't change. It was 3 years. Things didn't change in Cuba. Bay of Pigs happened here, and it was very clear things were not going to change in Cuba. And so my grandfather decided to come to the United States, and he was 60 years old at the time. They literally had very, very little money. They left everything behind. And so for that generation, it was really about survival, recovering what had been lost, left behind in Cuba. My grandfather, his life had been coffee, so it was, how do I get back into the coffee business? How do I rebuild my life? How do I create a future for my family? And so that's why they really had no choice but to band together and survive. And when the business was established by my grandfather, it was really like a hobby for him to keep him busy. That's what my dad and my uncles say. And it didn't really make money for the first 5 years. Nobody took a salary. My dad worked in a restaurant at night as a busboy and then a waiter, and my uncle worked as a mechanic during the day and would roast and pack coffee at night. My dad would deliver coffee during the day, and sometimes he would come back to the office with more coffee than what he left in the van, because they would sell the coffee on consignment and then it wouldn't sell and he'd have to bring it back. So it was very challenging times, and they really had no option but to band together and survive. And I think their hard work and their perseverance really paid off. And so now here we are, my generation, we're very lucky. We have this wonderful business. It's coffee, it's cool, it's fun, it's something, grows in beautiful, exotic places, as I mentioned. It's a sizable business where we can all, learn and participate and grow. And, with the help, of our consultant, my generation bought out my parents' generation 2 years ago. So now we are the shareholders with the voting shares. But there are differences. There are differences of opinion, strategy, So really, what we really need to work on is coming together as a generation, G4. What do we want to do? What do we want to stand for? And kind of break free from some of the generational challenges presented by my parents. As I mentioned before, we're in a baton pass, and we're going to have to grab that baton out of some of the hands, because I don't know if they're going to let it go. But we're finding our way, and I think that we're also kind of redefining, what do we want out of this experience? My parents' generation was, they were the owners, they were the board, they were the operational managers. Now we have family members that don't work in the business and aren't on the board, or another of my cousins, she's on the board, but she doesn't work in the business. And it's a mix of, shareholders. So we established the family council the operational management, and then moved my parents' generation into governance. But these are all new bodies, new ways of being. You were talking about how do we make decisions together. So we're finding our way. I think if we can make it through, this will be our biggest contribution to the business, this transition.
Well, how did you manage the, I mean, it's so often the transition from one generation to another is really traumatic. And it sounds like you had some challenges, but you were basically successful in moving across. What did you do to be successful in that transition?
I think we're still earning our success there.
In what way?
Yeah, meaning we're still working on it. We're still in a transition. I think the most significant part was actually buying out my parents' generation because they don't own the business anymore. We have the voting shares, so that gives us power to make decisions as a generation. But we're still coming into that. We haven't really, we're finding our way.
So say more. What do you mean finding your way? You're in control, you're making your...
I know, but what does it mean to be an owner? What does it mean to be a good shareholder? What does it mean to be a good board member, a good managing director? It's all of these things. How do we, what do you do when a board member doesn't act properly? It's all these things and that we never had to deal with before because all of the power, all the control was with 4 people, and now we're 14. It's very different.
So it's interesting that the learning is as much after the transition as before, because the older generation says, oh, when we do the transition, that's over, and maybe that's true for them, but it sounds like for your generation, having the power and the authority is only the first step.
Exactly, because they're still there with us almost every day. My parents' generation, my dad, my uncle, my aunt, advising. They're still very much hands-on with the business. So we're finding our way.
Yeah, well. So James, it's like 150 years of King Ranch. There must have been lots and lots of crises. What are some of the great crises, and how did the family overcome them, and what was the result in the family after getting through them?
Sure. So this could be a really long talk, but
we got all day.
just the quick history first. My great-great-great-grandfather, Captain King, the beef boom ended right before he died, and he put the ranch up for sale. But the Europeans had stopped buying ranch land like they had been doing during the big post-Civil War beef bonanza, right? And so he pulled it off the market. Then he dies. And there's a lot of ways to say this, but he basically gave his wife the gift of a big ranch and a lot more debt. And if not for his wife, Henrietta King, and his daughter, the only child that stayed, the ranch wouldn't have lasted a single generation. But so Alice, who married Robert Clayburgh, and her mother, Henrietta King, they stayed. All 4 other siblings left. 1 died, 3 left. And then back to your slides again, Dennis, you brought up the heavy-handed leader that was so prevalent through all those. What's crazy about us is we had the first one, and then we went through this really difficult period of bad cattle prices, heavy drought, into the Depression, and then finally we squeezed our way up until ExxonMobil, humble at the time, found some oil and gas, and that's really the reason that kept us afloat. But it was a 50-year struggle to make it through that, of just kind of hanging on. And everybody assumes, everybody's, running at 10,000 horses and living in mansions, but ranching back then in South Texas was not romantic. It was pretty miserable for a lot of people, and a lot of people vacated. But then we had a second heavy-handed leader in the 3rd generation, Bob Clayburgh, that ran the ranch for 50 years. And that was a vacuum developed, and somebody's picked up the mantle and led it again. So I'm impressed with the people on either side of me and all of their proactive measures, because we were very delayed in doing all of these good things that we all are supposed to be learning from these conferences. It wasn't really till the 70s. Let me back up a second. So then every generation following that, it's almost like we like punching ourselves in the gut when we do a transition. And so I'm hoping that, this 5th to 6th, as we're going through now, it won't feel like that, because we've had kind of a fallout a little bit. So back to the first point I said, I can't stress enough that building something that we're proud of as a family is the reason we're really here. Like, you can't give it up. I was telling somebody earlier, my time in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps is a great example of an organization that makes you love the Marine Corps and hate it at the same time. And family business puts you through that little gauntlet every once in a while too. And but I think we're getting better at not ripping the Band-Aid off so suddenly and kind of really being more formulaic in this process. And also I'll say too, that kind of unrelated, is like, people see King Ranch and they see a lot of years and a lot of family and they think, oh, they must be doing a good job. It doesn't feel like that a lot of times when you're inside it. I'm not downplaying it. We're still together. But so to answer your question, Dennis, there's been growth. There's been lessons learned. And the other thing that I was talking to my friends a second ago about is that in the last 10 years, the 10 most famous Texas ranches, 6 of them have sold. And so there's even this new push of, look at what our old friends are doing, the people that we built this Texas ranching industry, and they're all giving up. But we did an anonymous survey not too long ago, and I was actually curious of like, who's got the guts to stick this out? And it was like 95%. There was no issue, and like, we want to keep this thing going. And even the 5% was not a straight, I don't want to be involved. It was just, I have something to say. And so that's probably the best thing that's come of all of our failures and our almost defeats, was that more conviction. And we've actually toughened our guts into putting up with this over and over again. I wish we didn't make it so difficult, but again, it's made us bounce back that much better, I think, over time. Does that answer your question? That's a little bit different.
It's becoming clear that there's no cruise control for a family business. It's like wherever you are, something can happen, and you can't be prepared for everything. So, Michael, what do you have to share about?
For us, the big challenge was the Great Recession. So up until that time, the bank had never had any annual losses that at least our dad is aware of. But then the Great Recession came along and hit the banking industry pretty hard, us in particular. The nice thing is that our dad had invested outside of banking or outside of First Bank and banking in general. And so there was some resources that he could reinvest, and that's what he did during that time period. So that was one thing that really helped us during the time period, was he had these outside resources, the diversification, that he saw an issue that needed to be addressed, and so we reinvested as a family in the bank, and that made a big difference. The thing I'd say is that during that time period, whether it was the family or the leadership and a non-family CEO at the time, we were very transparent about what was going on. So I was an attorney for a period of time, came back in 2010, and I'd meet with folks like Joe Ambrose as one. We'd meet with some clients, and we would just be transparent about things that are going on. And it was, those are difficult meetings, but I think everyone really appreciated the transparency, appreciated that the family, was reinvesting, and we were doubling down on the bank. I think that went a long way. And from the employee standpoint, for them to see that transparency, I think was really important. And really, an amazing job that the team did in terms of getting us through a really difficult period. A lot of dedication to the company. We talk a lot about the family, but really, I think I'd emphasize the employees of the company and all that they did to keep us going strong through that time period and set us up now to thrive coming out of that. And then the last part, I guess I'll mention, is that sort of the theory of don't let a crisis go wasted. Our dad has been incredibly transparent with the next generation about what happened, and I think that's a really great thing. It's easy to tell your kids, your grandkids, all the great things you did, but I think as we've been doing, I think it's a great idea to share some of the challenges. It's really important to share the challenges you went through too, because otherwise what the kids see or the next generation sees is, so-and-so was a genius, and how could I measure up to that? Well, the reality is we all go through challenges, and it's about getting back up. And so, sometimes did Grandpa say that? Wow. But in some ways, it's great that he did, and he's transparent about his challenges, and then challenges for the company. And I think what didn't kill us, what will make us stronger going forward.
Great. Well, we've got a couple more minutes, so let's do one third quick round and answer the question. So every family faces the problem as you get more and more people, well, we're together this generation, but can we really make it and stay through the next generation? And so maybe each of you could say a little bit about what you're doing for your next generation in terms of keeping yourselves connected as a family, keeping your shared identity, and at the same time respecting the fact that some of them may want to go off on some other path on their own. So let's hear from each of you. Frank?
So, at this point, and having just retired as chairman, part of it was keeping the magic. And it's really important to build a positive association for your young generations. So we have a big family meeting every 3 years that we try to make a exciting and, engaging experience. A lot of the really younger kids don't kind of get the business side of it, but that's okay. They know that something's special happening. Our investment in our sort of 20 to 30-year-olds has been the best way to sell that magic into the future generations. But, our goal is to keep this going. We want to keep building it. It's a real privilege to have a family business like this. So, things like the venture capital division, we branded it after the old ancestor, the lumberman who started it, Gideon Hixon. And maybe we created a few values that we don't know whether Gideon really had or not, but if you look at our logo, he's starting to look a lot like Abraham Lincoln. And we, have created that this was a person who believed in other people and would do deals, sort of a spit and a shake type of old traditional values of hard work and, in tough times we use humor together and stay together to do it. I mean, this sounds a little fluffy, but it actually makes a big difference. And our young family members care about the business. We've invested heavily in them. And what I'm seeing right now is this whole change in the family dynamics where I'd say we are closer than we've been. I would say now going to the 7th generation, we're certainly in a lot of ways closer and more aligned than my mother's generation. Wow. So we're pretty proud of that.
Lisette?
So the generation that's coming up behind me, they're little still. The oldest is a sophomore in high school, and the youngest is going to be born in the next few weeks. So they're young, but I see us raising them the same way we were raised. Like my cousins for me were like my siblings. We always celebrated, everything, first communions and baptisms and graduations and everything together. And so for me, it's very important that my son, I have a 10-year-old son, that he spend time with his cousins and really build those bonds and really love love all his family members and know who they are and call them, we say tío or tía, abuelo, abuela, it's all these, expressions of love and family. And then also bring him to the office, so he comes, if has a day off or, we don't, we're in manufacturing, we don't get the bank holidays off. So he'll come to work with me, and just, walk the plant with my dad and, spend the day with me and just kind of see what I do, what we do. And when we go to the supermarket, we always walk down the coffee aisle and he's merchandising the shelf and, he's, so he's developing a sense of pride around what we do and our product and wow, he's so almost more proud of seeing the product on the shelf than I am. And that gives me, inspiration and makes me happy.
James?
Yes, we are communicating to an extremely high level right now. So much so that it's on every week there's something coming in your inbox of hey, here's something to watch, here's something to discuss, here's something to talk about. And I don't know if that's sustainable for the long haul, but it grabs them up, and I think that comes in waves, right, where you really try to push this information in front of them as much as possible, because the amount of, however you communicate, a big portion of people are not going to read, they're not going to dig in, they're not going to ask the questions. And so I think what we figured out is that more and more we have to really be proactively communicating over and over and over. And to those of you, those in the family that are engaged, it seems almost like too much, but the ones that haven't been engaged in the past, you're picking them up. There's also we've offered more opportunities for family members to get involved. through the things I already spoke about. And you've got to realize that, it's a segment of the business. It is a cost center that you have to, that's going to require real money if you're going to continue to keep these shareholders satisfied with what you're trying to tell them. Because you could do all the right things, but if they don't know it, they'll complain that you're not. And so you have to tell them as much as you do it. And you talked about community involvement. It almost becomes like the family becomes another piece of community involvement for your business, so you've got to feed that.
You are community.
Absolutely.
Well, I mentioned our first family meeting for the next generation, so that's part of what we've started, and we're just really embarking on this journey. Internships, so Stephen took part in an internship, and then the next oldest in Ellen's family took part in an internship. One thing I'll say that was great is that, there's so many changes going on in technology and in banking in general, and to utilize not just, to not only educate the next generation, but also to utilize their insights and maybe a different perspective that they have. And so we did that in both cases. So Stephen did one on blockchain, and then his brother did did a sort of a report or analysis on artificial intelligence. And it's something that, like, my understanding of large language models, I'm not sure is any better than the next generations, because they have, it was so new, it's all so fresh. So I think that's been a nice thing to really connect and make it active, so it's not just, here, learn this, read this book, look over my shoulder as I do something, but here's something active to do, so maybe hopefully it's more interesting to you that way as well.
Great. Well, we have time for 2 questions, so let me invite someone who wants to ask a question to stand up and in a loud voice ask something. Stand up. Speak up.
My name is Victoria. Thank you all so much. It sounds like you have to grapple with a lot of things. My question for you, all of you, is how have you dealt, or how has your family dealt with the sudden death of a patriarch or a leader in the company that was kind of the person that was, leading the charge? I'm just kind of wondering about how that goes, the succession and the impact of that.
Anybody have?
We had a very interesting situation where my great uncle was running the family businesses, which was really very much like a holding company at that time as this venture investment was growing. And then I think he had like his 7th heart attack or something, and realized there was really nobody. And so we actually turned to an in-law who was my father, who was an investment banker in Boston, who was then brought down to run the family companies in Texas. And it actually changed sort of some of the insularity to have an in-law running it. And actually the things that he did he was instrumental in taking this big holding and then taking it public and sort of changing the fortunes. But he went to the family and said, we got to make a decision. Are we going to be a manager of assets, or are we going to be a business builder? And so based on that, he came in, took the company public, and then distributed it out to the family, and then kept a whole set of assets to grow and rechange the culture around, let's go back to being builders. Let's not think of ourselves in the preservation business. And in this case, the death changed forever the way we thought about our family businesses, but it came from the outside.
Just because it's too similar, I just spoke about, we had 2 patriarchal figures, the founder, Captain King, and then Bob Clayberg. Both times when they died, in-laws took over. Robert Clayberg first, Bob's dad, and then my grandfather, Jim Clement. And both times, to your point, doesn't have to be blood, but doesn't even have to be an in-law. And it took an in-law stepping in. And then following my grandfather, we turned to Darwin Smith, actually, of Kimberly-Clark, ran the company for a while. And so it took an in-law to realize this doesn't have to be a blood family member running this to still remain a family business. And that's a hard identity for people to break, is everybody thinks it's family, family, family. We have learned that sometimes it's better, not only because there's no talent, I said that incorrectly. Not because there's not any talent in the family, but because politically there becomes a power centered around the branch who's in charge. And that can be difficult. And so, but the biggest thing is don't leave people in charge until they die. 2 different times by us.
Great. Well, one more question. Who wants to step up? Go ahead. Loud and clear.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Chip Wagner. Frank, and this can be directed at you because of something you said or to anyone. You mentioned about leading the company on culture. And I just kind of had a question on that. These are my 2 siblings. And as our company has grown, it's kind of to the point now where we don't know every employee on that personal aspect and don't have that close connection. What have some of you done to further that culture that then means something to that, entry-level employee or that employee that you don't see every day and impacts them?
When I became chairman, I went around and interviewed all the people who work in the company, which were, it's mainly non-family management. And they all said how much they loved working for the family, how much they liked adopting the family brand as part of what they did. But their worry was, what happens with this next generation? And so when we designed the idea of having a specialized annual meeting for the under 40s, under the thinking that any good employed family member shouldn't be able to go attend a meeting on a Tuesday, Wednesday in May, we did it over a weekend in November, flew in all the young family members, but we had it run by the young, not the old, young non-family management who got a chance to practice what an annual meeting is like, but also they spent this time with the young family members. 15 years later of doing this now, this closeness that's there has allowed us to really imbue some of the family values and culture and extend this idea of being a family to our employees. And they know that it's worth spending their life working for our family companies because they know the young family members. They've coached those young family members through business school exams. They celebrated each other's children being born. It's been a really exciting thing to see. So one of the things that I would say as you're doing this is think about the values that are important to your family, but make sure that that's something that your family employees can borrow as well and make part of their life.
Great. Well, we have here on the stage over 20 generations of family business. So let's give them a hand and thank them.